Great. I think we can slowly start.
Sure.
Yeah, just to respect the people who are already here. I'm sure there will be more people in the meantime. It's super hot here in Belgium, in the UK as well, probably on a Friday, like late afternoon. In this weather, it might be the issue as well. So let's see how it will go. Yeah, thank you so much for being here, for really like joining us on Friday. So today we will do our traditional one of our traditional migration dialogue sessions under GenSeM. And today Louisa, Maria, and Mursal are here to present their work. Their recent published paper, which is titled as Walking with Afghan Women Using Mobile Methods to Understand Differentiated Embedding Within Different Places Across England. I'm not going to summarize the paper, they will really present it, but I will just briefly introduce the speakers so that you know, probably most of you already know, but for the people who do not know, Louise Ryan is a senior professor of sociology and director of the Global Diversities and Inequalities Research Center at London Metropolitan University. And Maria Lopez is also a professor of sociology in School of Social Sciences and Professions. And also she is deputy director of Global Diversities and Inequalities Research Center at the same university. Mursal, Rasa was a research assistant working together with Louise and Maria when they were writing this publication and also when they were doing the research. But now she is in a new job, and we really thank her to be here with us, although it is a bit like challenging for her at this stage. So now I will give the floor to Louisa to present. So in the meantime, yeah, I think you already accepted new people. So she will present her screen, yes. And I will give the floor to her. And then Maria and Mursal will also take the floor to present. And then we will have a little bit of discussion afterwards.
Great. So thank you very much, Sinem. It's really nice to be here today on this very, very hot day. And thanks to everybody who's taken time out of their busy schedule to come and join us today. I can see now that more people are joining, so that's good as well. So as Sinem has said, this is a paper that we've recently published. So if you're interested in any of the things that we're saying today, here are the details of the full published paper, and we can share this slide again at the end if you want to take down the details. So the paper is entitled Walking with Afghan Women Using Mobile Methods to Understand Differentiated Embedding Within Different Places Across England, and that paper was published just a few months ago in GEMS, the Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies. So in the paper, we draw upon data from our current Nuffield Foundation funded project, and we'll say a bit more about wider project and the team in a little while. But for now, we're going to specifically focus on the work that we three did with Afghan women. The paper has two key aims. Firstly, to contribute towards advancing the methodology of mobile methods within migration research. As the title suggests, we're specifically talking about walking interviews. And secondly, to enhance understanding of how recently resettled women are navigating embedding in particular places. And we're looking at quite varied geographical locations across England, including large multi-ethnic cities, but also smaller and less diverse towns around England. As we walk around the neighbourhoods, the women narrate their everyday experiences within these particular places. We discuss the extent to which they feel welcome and supported in the new locations, or if they face hostility. In so doing, we focus attention on relationality, their networks, the socio-cultural structures, and the power dynamics within these particular geographical locations across England. So just to start with an introduction and an acknowledgement of the wider literature, the ways in which migrants connect and identify with particular places is still not very well understood. In recent years, there's been growing interest in how refugees, particularly those dispersed to geographical regions not of their choosing, are navigating new and very unfamiliar places. And we know, for example, that in many countries, dispersal policies mean that newly arrived refugees are almost forced or instructed to go to particular geographical areas, for example, where there might be housing available, but these areas can sometimes be quite remote and not very diverse. It's in these local places where belonging emerges and is experienced, or indeed where everyday obstacles to belonging are encountered. Thus, it is in the local neighbourhood, which can be crucial as a place where refugees can begin to forge a feeling of being at home. And we are interested in familiarity, along with feelings of security and being comfortable in a place. To what extent do recently arrived refugees feel comfortable in these new localities? And in order to theorise and analyse this, we're using the lens of embedding. So embedding, as the name might suggest, is influenced in part by Mark Granovator's concept of embeddedness. And so you'll be familiar with the notion of embeddedness, which is often used in relation to migration. But the concept that I developed with my colleague John Mulholland, we thought that embeddedness sounds quite static. So instead we coined embedding as an ongoing process, which is complex, dynamic, and multidimensional. And so this is a way of understanding belonging and attachment through the dynamic lens of embedding as a verb. Embedding is also influenced by Bourdieu's notion of effort, that embedding requires ongoing effort. It's not something that you sort of do once and then it is achieved. It requires ongoing agency and ongoing effort and commitment over time to maintain. But of course, this effort is also circumscribed. So we're talking here about circumscribed agency, and it's necessary to acknowledge the barriers that migrants may encounter in their efforts at embedding in particular places. And so this points to the notion of differentiated embedding. So in other words, people may be embedding to different extents, to different levels, in different ways, in particular localities. So the notion of differentiated embedding points to different depths of attachment and belonging that migrants may experience and negotiate across different sectors. So, for example, it might be possible that you are deeply embedding in a local neighbourhood because of the amenities in that neighbourhood, because of the other people who live in a diverse neighbourhood. But at the same time, simultaneously, you may not be embedding at all in the labour market because of a shortage of jobs or because of barriers to employment. And so differentiated embedding is not a single dimension, but it aims to capture the multidimensionality of people's experiences across various sectors of society. And it's possible as well that migrants may have deep embedding or also more superficial or shallow embedding. So embedding can occur to different extents. And of course, that can also be dynamic and can change over time. And it's important to acknowledge that, I'll just come back to this point, that embedding is dynamic and it can be reversed. So embedding, again, as opposed to embeddedness, is not necessarily an achieved final state, but as we can see with anti-migration riots, with the kind of really vicious violence that we saw in cities like Belfast only last week, embedding can be undermined and it can actually result in disembedding, where people actually have to pack up and move under the threat of violence. So that's the kind of conceptual lens that we're using. In terms of the methodological approach that we apply in this paper, we are using walking interviews. So there's been growing attention in the literature to walking interviews as part of a wider category of what's called mobile methods. And the advantage of walking interviews is it's a technique which allows us to explore the relationship between people and place. The participant can be regarded as an expert guide. This also helps to shift the usual power relationships between the researcher and the researched. Because if the participant is guiding the walk, leading the walk, then that helps them to also take on the role of expert. We're drawing on Sarah Pink's classic work on walking with ethnography, which looks at mobile methods and emphasizes embodiment. In other words, we experience a particular geographical location through our body, through the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feel, the touch of these particular localities. As participants talk about the place whilst walking through that place, these interviews not only facilitate interaction between the participants and the environment around them, but they also enable researchers to hear people's interpretations of space under this multisensory stimuli of the surrounding environment, that we are with the participant in that environment. In this way, the method is especially useful for exploring participants' dynamic experiences of embedding in particular places. And I'll now hand over to Mursal, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the background to the schemes that we're discussing today. Over to you, Mursal.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, in terms of the resettlement schemes, in response to August 2021, the regime change in Afghanistan, when the Taliban took over, UK opened two schemes for Afghans. One was Afghan relocation and assistance policy, which Arab, which basically focused on relocating Afghans who used to work with UK government back in Afghanistan and people who helped the armed forces. And the other scheme was Afghan Citizen Resettlement Scheme, ACRS, which focused on relocating Afghans who supported democracy, Afghan women activists, and LGBTQ community, religious minority groups, and people who worked in humanitarian sectors. The schemes went through a lot of changes from the time it started. It's like whether it was funding or how it went through. And eventually in 2025, both schemes combined together as ARP, Afghan Resettlement Program. And yeah, so I think it's still continued, but it's mainly Arab and they focus on people who are in Afghan relocation and assistance policy and who worked with the UK government for now. Okay. Yeah, next slide. Just to, as Louise mentioned, it's part of a wider project that is funded by NAFIL, but it's University of UCL, London Metropolitan University, and Middlesex University. The name of our colleagues are here. I'm not going to name everyone, but yeah, if you're interested, they are very valuable part of the research. But then, yeah, it's also like multi-method research, and it's because it's really wide. We did it with all people with different ages, different gender, and also people, young people who were exploring school. So yeah, we wanted to explore how they find moving from temporary accommodation to their permanent accommodation, and how geography, locality impact their settling and embedding, and also how work and education impact their embedding. Next slide, please. In terms of methodology, so Luis Maria and I had the honor to work with them on another paper, which was mainly on Afghan women who were resettled in London, and how they explored mobility within countries, and it was mainly focused on border policies and how they navigated those policies to do their care, and and how they navigate their way to explore and reconnect to the family members. If you're interested, it's also open access, and I think we have the link in the last slide. But this research is mainly started in the beginning of 2024 and continued towards the end of 2025. And yeah, so the walking interview was mainly with a group of women, 25 women with different ages, starting from 21 to 60. So it's very diverse. And one people who were identifying as a non-binary person. And it's the geography was very diverse. It was large cities like London and Birmingham to smaller towns in southeast and northwest of England, and also like there was like very countryside places that Louise and I traveled to northwest. Yeah, and it's a really different experience that we explored, and the length of their stay in their locality varied as well. It was from 1 year to 3 years, so they were all quite considered as fresh because like during the 3 years it's not a very long stay, but still it really varied their experience on how long they stayed in their locality. In terms of like the length of the walks, it's really depended on weather. As we know, it's London and UK. Yeah, and there were some of it happened during the winter, so it was freezing cold and snowing. So yeah, and when there was like snow, we did a shorter walk and then did the rest of the interview in a cafe or in their house. So we did have the experience of like actually seeing their place and how they experience their space. Next slide, please. In terms of key findings, so the sudden change of the regime and the sudden migration was very unexpected for a lot of our participants. Almost all of them didn't expect to come to the UK, and has never been a planned migration for any of them. As a lot of them, as we cited a lot of them here, that they say it wasn't even planned and it was all of a sudden, and they didn't expect to come to the UK. And for some of them, it was even like a loss. Migration was forced, and though like they had a very good job, very good like living situation back in Afghanistan, they did had to leave because of the regime change. So one of our participants, Mujda, he says like, I had to lock my house and leave everything, and I lost my identity, my position, my career, and everything. So it was considered as a loss for some of them, and so we didn't cite it here, but a lot of our participants had like a very good financial status back in Afghanistan, and they have to now deal with a lot of career challenges in the UK. Next slide. In terms of how they embed in a new place, we know that, as Louise mentioned, embedding is something that takes time, and it's not one sudden process. It's not a linear thing. So participants who were staying in 3 years, they did kind of share their experience of like how their embedding has changed. So in the initial stay, for example, Mujda, one of our participants, said that I didn't like the place that I was living, but eventually she really embedded in when she found a job and bought a house. So eventually she did like the area that she was living in. And also it's because some of our participants had to start from zero, and they literally mentioned that we have to start from zero in this area, and I have no clue how to live here. So it's mainly for the participant who like been in the area for like within a year, so their embedding was not kind of settled yet. And one of some of our participants like really felt home in the area and settled. So the experience really varied in terms of like how long they stayed and whether they were enrolled in job market and education. So those those things really mattered for them. Next slide, please. Yeah, in terms of safety, so the quest for safety was one of the major parameters for embedding. So almost all of our participants they felt safe in the UK, and they all were very grateful and showed gratitude to the UK government for the opportunity to be in a safe country, considering that they have all lived all their lives in a war and conflict state. So yeah, so Gulshan, one of our participants who had a very a financially stable life in Afghanistan, but then in the UK she was not experiencing the same level of comfort, but in terms of safety, they said like we feel very safe, and they showed gratitude for that. And our participants, Zamira, who said like after traumatic life in Kabul, we can finally we can sleep peacefully in our bed, which is most of the people, I assume, in peaceful countries take it for granted. So yeah, these little things really mattered for a lot of our participants. And yeah, one of our participants said like, now I know how life can feel. So yeah, this impact of peaceful and security really varied. And also in terms of so we have been talking about localities, and now we go to people's houses, so it's more about like domestic spaces. It was really different amongst our participants. So we are comparing to our participants who lived in the same local authority but had very varied experience in terms of how they liked their houses. So Breshna and his mom and her mom, the two widows that we were interviewing in London, they had a very nice flat, and they really liked it, and they felt very at home. They showed a lot of gratitude for government and local authority that providing them with the house that they had, and they had a very beautiful garden. And yeah, and Louise and I actually visited their house, and the garden was very nice, and the lady was gardening all the time, and the house was decorated in a very cultural way. So yeah, they had all these facilities, and they were very grateful for it. In the meantime, our other participant, who had one baby and one toddler and stuck in the fourth floor flat with no lift, so she had to carry everything all the way to fourth floor. They pushed her with a baby, and her husband was also a full-time security guard, so she had a lot of house responsibilities. And also she was very disappointed about like the UK housing being very dark, small, and yeah, she really wanted a bigger space, and the house was not even suitable for 4 people. It was for 3 people, but then the newborn baby was added. So yeah, there was like different experience even in the same local authority. Yeah, next slide. Oh, now I hand over to Maria. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Mursal. So yeah, when we interviewed women, we came along and interviewed them in different locations. We found out that one of the main things that women cared about was their access to shops where they could buy their own food and to a good price. So clearly, in that process of embedding, the financial situation and financial constraints were very important, was something they bear in mind all the time. So in describing the neighborhood, Watsman immediately introduced that theme to us. Oh, there is, as a kind of introducing and saying how well and happy she was, with the location she was living in. She mentioned, there are lots of halal shops. In Birmingham, that was in London, in Birmingham, Jahida and Sadia also made that kind of ongoing reference to halal meat, the facilities they had to buy that kind of food, and also to dress or get that shops or get access to that shops where they could buy Islamic clothing. So some other people, some other women started to get interested and start buying in other places that could not, that like German shops, etc., that are be cheaper than English ones, but they just made lots of references, ongoing references to Aldi, Lidl. And that was a recurring theme throughout all the interviews. And I remember, us having conversations about how important that was for them. And actually, some woman to say that she was a woman, Natsanin, in order to, just to kind of indicating that she was not happy with it. She liked it, she was happy, but she was not that happy with the area. She was looking forward to moving to a more multicultural area. She said, "Oh, it's very quiet. There's no immigrant people. They are mostly British people, and there are no Aldi. There are no Lidl in this area that we visited." So she was very, very keen. Tanina was very keen to move into another town in which she could have access to that kind of supermarket, and she didn't have to use the bus as she told us she was using. So yeah, I mean, these kind of discussions about supermarkets, etc., were throughout the whole interviews, and they permeated throughout the whole interviews. We also noticed this kind of dynamic embedding process when people when we met people who felt not very happy with their floor, with their houses, with their relocation, and with the flats they were living in. Like the case of Tahira, she was living in a fourth flat without a lift, so she had to carry the children, and she had to carry to the shops and everything up there. But she really liked the neighborhood. She felt comfortable. She knew all the area. She was very familiar with all the shoppings. She knew about parks, playgrounds, etc. She felt safe. She felt confident. She felt kind of belonging to the area. So we could see that kind of imbalance and ambiguity when referring to that. Feeling unsafe, yes, safety was, as we've been, discussing throughout this project, safety was also a very important topic that's mentioned throughout, every single interview. And as Mursal said before, lots of, these women had came to England in search of the safety and security, and they felt unsafe in the in Afghanistan. So they felt initially England was the place they were very happy, and they could secure themselves out of war bombing, etc. However, we've also met people who felt unsafe in the areas in which their locations were and which their houses were located. And then we traveled to Birmingham, and we met 3 sisters and a mum, and they were living in a very nice cul-de-sac. The house was very nice. 12, and they lived in a cul-de-sac with 12 semi-detached houses in a very peaceful. Partly, that was the impression we had when we arrived. Peaceful area, handy shops around, etc. So then slowly, the girls started to mention how unsafe they felt in the area, how dark, poorly illuminated, so they didn't feel safe walking around late in the afternoon when they came back from a study or work or whatever. And the woman had also reported some incidents involving Islamophobic encounters. And Gulshan, for example, told us about an incident she personally suffered in a supermarket when a woman shouted at her because she was wearing a headscarf. So that notion of feeling unsafe in an area that may not be that nice, they may feel isolated, clearly linked with the riots happening on summer 2024, and unfortunately had continued and are now happening in some places. So some women made reference to those, and that those events had made them feel unsafe and unsettled in England. And as I said, they just arrived with an idea that, oh, finally we're safe, we don't have to worry about bombing, etc. But then suddenly they found themselves feeling afraid of going out and meeting by chance those protesters who may be attacking them. So in Lancashire, Hasina said that she saw some people gathering around through the bus. So she gathering around, and they were very threatening. So she took the bus and immediately came back home. She felt very confident. Some people, most participants, had not actually witnessed any kind of event in person there, but had been kind of seeing that in TikTok and other social networks. And lots of people, lots of women said that they preferred to be at home and remained at home and not going out just because they were afraid of just being attacked by someone. They felt vulnerable, they felt afraid, and that was quite a new feeling for some of them and quite surprising for some of them. And then we've got Maria, who described how terrifying the riots were in London and how unsafe she felt in London. And actually, we know that in London they did not happen, but she may have perceived like the whole country going into those kind of riots, and eventually seeing them. So again, we talk about disrupted embedding when they don't feel safe in an environment, when women don't feel safe in an environment. And I think it was Mursal who mentioned that we interviewed Mursal, who identify themselves as a non-binary, a very young person in their 20s, and they had been evacuated from Afghanistan along with other 30 people, LGBTQ+. So eventually they were put into a temporary accommodation in Midlands, and when they were told, you're moving to London, they were very happy that they would become involved in all this LGBTQ+, activism, or having other friends, etc. But what they found is that they were in a building filled with Afghan families, so they felt a bit constrained and started to mask themselves and changing their clothes and trying not to call people's attentions, etc. So they felt a bit constrained and uncomfortable, be surrounded by people of their own culture, and knowing all the stereotypes and ideals about gender, sexuality, etc. So they felt judged and watched, and they wanted just to leave and be moved and relocated somewhere else. And the fear was that apparent that they asked Louise not to record the interview. They didn't want any kind of registry of that conversation because they didn't trust. We're lucky we have Afghan neighbours, so that is the opposite to that case of the non-binary person, with people that we also met, women who were very happy to be surrounded by Afghan people. We've got a case of Maria, who had a disability, and she was living in a building. She was a disability and quite, with that kind of immobility and impairment. So she was very happy that people just popped in her house, brought food, and Afghan people. And so she could clearly, talk with them, etc. We've got the case of Mursal, and a young woman who was wearing a hijab, and we had a walk with her, and she said, "Oh, no one is staring at me in London. I really like London." And she told us about her experience back in India when she was living there before coming in England, and how different it was, and how those kind of discrimination and violence was directed to people with hijab, etc. But she was very happy to be living in London. And however, her experience contrasts with Paya, Mana, and Marshall, who felt wary of London neighbourhoods, and that when they felt lots of intense concentrations of Muslim Afghans, because they felt again watched and judged. So as we can see, being surrounded by Afghan people can have different and contradictory, can cause different and contradictory feelings among women. And so we can see that this dynamic, making reference back to that theoretical background in those dynamic processes of embedding, how sometimes you feel, as Louise explained before, very well embedded and embedded into the system, and then suddenly something happens that you feel, well, I'm out of it.
Okay, I think it's back to me. Is it for this last one? Yes.
I think
you,
so,
Maria.
yes.
Yes, thank you. So, as we've mentioned at the outset, the families and the women that we were interviewing were often being relocated to parts of England that they were completely unfamiliar with. And this was often because of the availability of accommodation. They were assigned to those areas by local authorities, local administrative councils, for example. And this meant that they could end up in small towns and villages where they felt quite isolated. We interviewed a woman, Maria, in the north of England, and she felt very lonely and isolated. She didn't speak any English at all. She was surrounded entirely by British people. There were no other Afghan families in her little town, and she wasn't able to have any kind of informal or relaxed conversations with the neighbours. Another young woman that we met, Sarah, she spoke fluent English. She had been a university student in Afghanistan and she was studying here too in England. But her family had been housed in a beautiful village. It was a very pretty village, but it was literally in the middle of nowhere, completely surrounded by fields. And there were no amenities in the village. There were no cafes or any social amenities on the new housing estate where Sarah and her family could just meet and get to know other people. The other challenge with this kind of isolated rural location was the lack of public transport. There was one bus an hour. So if you missed that bus or if that bus was cancelled, then it was impossible to get into the local city where Sarah was attending college. She and her family were absolutely desperate to move from their beautiful house in the beautiful village in order to go into the city where perhaps the house would not be so nice, but they would be closer to friends, they'd be closer to the mosque, they'd be closer to shops, and also to college and to job opportunities. So what we see here is that kind of the importance of location, the importance of place, and how that place can either be enabling, and we've seen several examples of that already, or where a place can be seen as disabling in the sense that that place does not provide opportunities for embedding. So bringing this to a conclusion, it's important to go back to our conceptual framework and say that embedding in new places takes time. In this paper, through our in-depth interviews and through the walking methods that we employed, we sought to understand that active process of embedding and the opportunities, but also the obstacles that our participants were encountering. All of the participants we interviewed expressed enormous sense of relief and gratitude to be offered refuge in the UK. As resettled persons coming through the Afghan scheme, they had secure immigration status and they could plan ahead for the future of their lives. Many of them already said that the UK was beginning to feel like their second home. However, through the lens of differentiated embedding, we wanted to understand how they were navigating and forging attachments and belonging in particular places, in their local neighbourhoods. As we've argued, the embodied experience of walking around with the participants, visiting their homes, exploring their neighbourhoods, seeing how they navigate local contexts, including local transport, how they use local amenities like parks, while listening to their story, that approach is immensely informative. And the walks really revealed very varied levels of familiarity in place. It was interesting to observe Maria and I were doing a walking interview with one young person who set off very confidently on the walk as the expert guide. And after a few minutes, it turned out that we were now lost. And in fact, she had to consult her phone and Google Map in order to get us back on track because she was new and the area was very unfamiliar to her. Our sample of 26 participants also reveals the immense variety of resettled Afghans. The Afghans who arrived in the UK are very, very varied by age, by family composition, by their language fluency, by their different socioeconomic status. Some of them were highly educated in Afghanistan. Some of them had no formal education, and some of the women were actually illiterate in Dari and Pashto in their native language. And so they were really struggling to learn English from scratch. So their needs differ, and also the resources that they're able to mobilize to facilitate their embedding are also quite different. We think in longitudinal research is very important to understand how these processes are evolving over time. And as Mursal mentioned earlier, we three have collaborated before on a previous project where we used longitudinal research, and there we could see significant change in people's experiences as years went by. So we're now going to stop because we really want to allow time for questions, but this is just a list of the open access publications that we've published so far. There's one there on access to employment, which we've published in sociology. There's the article that we three co-authored, It Hurts My Heart, Afghan Women in London, Negotiating Family Relationships and Immobility Regimes Across Borders. That was published in Population, Space and Place. Then there's a paper that we published, which is more on the policy dimension. So if you're very interested in these policies, there's an article we published in the Journal of Critical Social Policy. And then there's another paper that Maria and I published, which was based on an earlier data set of how these Afghans are navigating immigration regimes and borders. So at this point, and of course, just to remind you that the paper on which today's publication is based is the walking interviews published in GEMS. So I'll stop there. I can see the numbers have increased quite significantly while we've been speaking. So it's lovely to see so many people here now. And we'll hand back to you, Simone, for questions, please.
Yep, thanks a lot. Thank you so much, Louise, Mursal, and Maria. So it was beautiful to really go through all these stories one by one together. So we can really feel like how it went through, but of course we are also wondering about the background and all other things. Maybe we can benefit from having not a huge group and turn it into a very good discussion. I would strongly encourage everyone, if possible, to maybe turn on their videos so that we can see each other. If you have any questions or any comments on the paper itself or the research process, so please feel free to raise. I already have my own questions. I'm wondering about so many things. But first of all, I will really would like to give the floor to you if you have any burning question, any comment, any feedback to Louise, Maria, and Mursal. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, if they mind recording, we can stop it maybe.
Okay, so Chinar, and at the same time, I will stop recording so that you feel more comfortable.